webinar. Okay, all right. I think so. Oh, all right. Uh, Thrilled to have so many registrations, Karan, and GenAI has really definitely taken the world by a storm. So much excitement. Okay, so
Yeah,
well, hello everyone. Yeah, it is. Hello everyone. This is Shailendra. I'm the founder at HyperTest, and I will be doing this webinar with my good friend, co-founder, and CTO, Karan. Hey, hi, Karan.
Ashen.
Okay, all right. So we will keep the agenda of this webinar really simple. We will discuss reasons why teams are considering to use GenAI for quality and testing. Broadly, we'll try to discuss what are the reasons why GenAI shines and what could possibly be the reasons where it could start missing a few things. The idea is that, yes, it has a lot of potential, but it may not be the one size fit all solution. Now, we claim to be experts ourselves. We have been part building a test automation tool for about 2, 3 years now, and we between us have about decade of experience leading engineering and product teams. So we have some bit of context on why we think GenAI is going to play a really good role in helping engineering teams scale engineering. So ready, Karan?
Yeah, sure. Let's start.
Okay, all right. So Karan, the last time I got so excited about anything like GenAI was probably when Git came along. Now this was like 15 years back, and well, I'm too old. But before before Git was there, I don't know if you remember, there were these primitive versions of version control like CVS and SVN, which had these centralized
Hmm.
code repositories that made code collaboration for developers really a struggle. And then Git came
Right.
through, and it really changed the way. It was simple yet so powerful. Have you ever
Yeah,
felt
there's
that
no going back.
excited about any? Absolutely. And have you ever felt so excited about anything like this before?
Uh, yeah, I mean, if I think about it, I think in the last decade, Docker,
Mm,
Docker container or like containerization in general,
mm,
that would be basically the most important thing that came out of software development. Uh,
mm,
there's one thing that I can't go back to is not writing my code without Docker because I mean, the deployments and it has in fact opened up the way to continuous delivery as well, which is very hard to do if you don't have containers in the first place. It's not impossible, but yeah, very hard. It is but if we just have
mm.
to consider the last decade, at least for me, Docker was the winner. But
Yeah, absolutely.
that doesn't come close to what GenAI has to offer, I think.
Right. In fact, yeah, it's difficult to imagine now a life before Docker. So yeah, Docker was definitely a powerful shift. But yeah, but let me tell you, the craze for GenAI is real, right? It almost feels like that GenAI is probably the second industrial revolution that everybody was waiting for, because it is almost 10x the productivity of nearly all the functions, and the last frontier that it has to capture now is software. So I you wouldn't blame me for saying this, but like software is more or less the brain of any organization, and where GenAI has to really put its brain now is to ensure how to can make all the mundane drudgery kind of works that happen in software engineering easy. I hope you agree with me.
Right. So, I mean, GenAI has been fantastic. It has disrupted a lot of content creation, and uh, if
Mm,
we consider code, it's some sort of a content. I think that it would be it would not be a long stretch to call it content as well. Uh,
mm.
yeah, it has done that, and I think I am able to appreciate as a CTO, as a developer myself. I am able to see the goodness that it brings. Uh, I think this is about testing, right? This webinar is about testing.
That's
So
right.
uh, uh, there are
So
trade-offs,
basically,
right? So
yeah, you're right. You're right. The trade-offs and generally, Karan, the reason people have been and some of the kernels that help us understand why people are so excited about something like GenAI is the popularity of tools like Copilot. Copilot has become really a very popular tool among devs, and I assume one of the reasons for that is not only because how powerful it is as a code assistant, but I'm assuming it's also very powerful as a test assistant, because code at the end of the day is just content, right? And LLMs are
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
very effective in generating all forms of content. So generally speaking, all engineering heads or all engineering managers or even quality heads are now considering some form of GenAI to their testing and quality goals. And it would be really helpful if you would maybe give us a perspective as a engineering head as yourself, whether tools like Copilot solve some problem for your daily work.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, as I said, there are trade-offs. So let's start with the good
Mm,
parts. So
right.
I think, if I have to think of a way to actually use it in the best form possible, it would be boilerplating. So I
Mm.
wouldn't overly rely on the code that it produces, but it is going to be a really good boilerplating solution,
Let
better
me let me
than
share the
anything else that
presentation.
we have
Sorry.
seen.
Right. Absolutely. Let me share this a presentation so that our audience knows what we're talking about. But yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Go
Right,
on.
right, right. Yeah, I mean, it basically is a good boilerplating tool, right? Because if you're starting your testing journey, and if
Mm.
you have not already written, say, unit test for your application, it becomes difficult over time, because the amount of work that you now have to do, code grows, so the requirement for the test code also grows. And if you have not done it, it becomes very hard. It's just inertia, basically. It's not just in physics; it's in software as well. So
Right.
yeah, so boilerplating, getting up to a very good start. That's basically the best way to do it. There's just no replacement for that. And in fact, most of the test code is, to be honest, boilerplate. There's not a lot of business logic in a test code. So
Mm.
if you're generating unit tests from scratch, if that's the first time that you're doing it, do it. I mean, use GenAI to Copilot or even ChatGPT or any other form of GenAI. Use that for boilerplating. There's also you might be there's also one interesting thing that people tend to write. It's not a good practice, but they tend to write the code and the unit test uh, thinking, wearing the same hat, which might in,
Mm.
which might introduce some sort of an implementation bias at that point of time. That okay, this is my function, this is my code, and okay, I'm going to write a test which sort of validates what I have just written here. If you're doing it like that, uh, if you had written test, doesn't matter after or before, but if you have sort of a pause at that point of time, that okay, I'll not think about how I've implemented it, and I'll just see how this function is supposed to behave.
That's true. And I think
Achieving
and I think one
achieving
of
that
the
achieving that is easier here because it gives you
yeah,
a second
absolutely.
perspective.
That's true. That's true. In fact, what I can add is that one of the reasons why people have been so gung ho about using GenAI, especially unit testing, is not because Copilot has become so popular, but also, well, I guess teams believe that if devs are the people who are writing code, they should be the people who should be fixing it or testing it properly so that they're able to ship much cleaner code. And
That absolutely.
the most earlier applications, yeah, the most earlier applications or the earliest potential of GenAI, I'm assuming, has been explored in unit testing, and that's essentially why Copilot has become so popular, or why teams are considering using it for their overall testing goals. But do you also believe that discovery is also an essential part of, or is an essential or is a good promise of GenAI when it is explored around unit testing?
Yes, specifically like uh, if you're trying to figure out the corner cases for a particular piece of code, getting a second perspective would definitely help. And I think, at least for the things that we have tried it on at our organization itself, it has been able to come up with certain good cases. But
Mm,
again, I would caution that you need to definitely review the code. Code needs to be reviewed, so test code also needs to be reviewed, and
yeah,
you
that's
can
right.
basically think that okay, someone else has written it for you, so you need to be doubly sure, because unless you're unlike your coworkers, this tool will not understand your application as good or as inherently as your as your peers, right? You definitely need to
Mm,
be more cautious about that.
that's right. That's right. I think that goes without saying. But obviously, all tools have some things to worry about and some goodness that comes by default as part of the package. But I think it more or less feels that almost all issues are fixed if teams consider using GenAI or Copilot kind of tools for unit testing, right? Do you think anything that they need to worry about?
Oh, it's not a one size fit all, no silver bullet here in software development. It wasn't the case 20 years ago. It's not going to be the case 20 years from now as well. So
Right.
no, it's not a perfect solution.
Mm,
Use it with caution. There are some short-term problems, I guess, with Copilot. It does not work uh, as good as it would for certain frameworks. Some popular frameworks, it would be able to generate maybe stubs as well, mocks as well. But for some, it would not be able to do that much. You might need to reprompt every time, and then again you have to review the code. That goes without saying. Uh,
mm,
and in fact, interestingly, if you're using Copilot to both generate the code as well as the test code, I think
mm,
the bias that we discussed right now, right? The developers writing them at the same time, test
right.
and the test code, uh,
Mm.
it's it, it's going to have the same problem. But
So a lot of people, yeah, right. Go on, go on. Uh-huh.
basically there needs to be a maker and checker system like it's mentioned here that you need one sort of perspective to have a code written, and it would try to generate a test by using your implementation itself, so it would not reflect the behavior of the it might not reflect the real behavior but what it's been implemented. So if you have named your functions in certain way, or if you have implemented them in a certain way, you can expect tests that would actually pass. That There's something that we have seen, tests generated by Copilot that actually pass, uh, but they are wrong or they are
Mm.
inaccurate, that they do not reflect the intended behavior of the application. But again, you need to read and you need to do the review of the code that it generates. Use it for boilerplating, basically.
Right. And I'm assuming you say so because a large part of testing, or I guess testing is incomplete if you are testing your code without the context of your application. And where Copilot shines extraordinarily is the ability to generate tests for the code that you've written. But it it wouldn't have much context on the components which are outside your code, right? Or
Yeah,
how would you
integration.
how right? Uh,
Yeah, integration test, basically.
that's right. That's right. So if it is not able to do integration testing and it doesn't have the context of your application, then and what bucket would you fit in the kind of test that it generates?
Well, they would be we can call them low level unit tests, or
Right.
just plain old unit tests. Good for functions which are having not a lot of dependencies. Pure functions, if I want to just call it that. Uh, it is good for that. But if you are having something which has a lot of business code and there are a lot of
Okay.
conditions, your code
Hmm.
coverage might not be fulfilled in a single prompt. You might need to do a lot of other. You again, you use it as a boilerplate, and then you use it uh, to get started with that. And it will not give you the full result, and it does not support everything as of now, right?
That makes sense. That makes sense. And generally, I'm assuming when devs ship code, there is some form of a, or not some form, a clear form of a maker checker system. You know, there is a person who's responsible for code review who essentially checks what you are trying to
Right.
commit. In case of these tests that are generated by Copilot, what kind of a maker checker system do you think it lacks, or is it because of an additional burden it provides on the team and the developer using Copilot? But what kind of a maker checker system do you think it would force teams to work with or force developers to work with?
It's just reviewing the code. That's actually not
Hmm.
very difficult.
Reviewing
Reviewing the code that
reviewing
was
test code, right? You mean reviewing test
right.
code?
Reviewing test code.
Hmm.
That is something that people would already do. It's just that. uh, if you trust it too much and the convenience that it gives, you might miss something.
Right.
And
That makes sense. Mm.
since there's a problem that the test that it writes, they might pass, but they might not reflect the real reality of the application. Uh, you would have a false sense of coverage, and I think that would be even worse than not writing tests at all, because at least you know that okay, I need to test it. I would be very careful about going, let's say, manually testing my application. But if you have
Right.
a false sense of assurance that okay, I have some tests which work and they pass as well,
Mm.
everything
No,
that I've done is basically correct.
that's the worst. That's the worst. That's the worst situation to be in. If you believe that what you've written is all good and passes, and you still have a problem in the application. Yeah, that makes complete sense. In fact, one thing that I like to add here, and something that you can also shine a little light on, is that we work with a lot of these organizations who are considering, GenAI for testing, and they seem to complain sometimes that sometimes the quantity of tests that GenAI ends up producing, especially the tools like Copilot, are a little too much, bordering to redundancy. A lot of redundant extra tests get generated, and when these tests are run as your as your check as your regression check, when you push your changes, it tends to choke the pipeline, the release pipeline. So would it be fair to say that sometimes aiming for completeness, GenAI tends to hallucinate a little and end up producing tests that are may not be that critical, or maybe borderline useless?
I mean, yeah, we've seen that happen.
Right.
Tests that are not too different, or test the same thing but with the slightly different inputs, which provide you with either no coverage, or they don't have, like we said that it is good for discovery, right? But it doesn't know
Mm,
what is good discovery or what is bad discovery. So it would end up creating maybe 10 tests or 100 tests for a function that if I was writing it myself, I would have only covered it in maybe like 2 or 3 tests and be done with it. The numbers
right.
might vary, but the idea is that since it has the capability to generate tests, it can generate too many, and then if you are blindly trusting, in fact, if you if I want to summarize our whole point, it's just that you won't blindly trust a boilerplate. I
Mm.
think I've used that term a lot since we
Yeah, that is
started.
what it is. That is what it is. Yeah, right.
You,
Absolutely. In
you you
fact,
wouldn't
I
trust it,
know
and you shouldn't trust it.
I know that you say this from experience. In fact, we've heard this from a lot of teams that we talk to, but I know that you say this from experience. So basically, Copilot kind of tools force you to have a new kind of a maker checker practice put in place, where the maker is the Copilot, the checker is the dev itself. Sometimes a lot of redundant tests that might slow down text execution, maybe impact release velocity. It definitely has no capability to integration testing, and I'm assuming that is what's critically important for application for teams which are testing their application. In the sense that if you are not able to test the complete behavior of your application, then just writing standalone unit test are not enough. It's not sufficient, right?
Right.
What do you think? Yeah, what do you think is the problem with these tests when it comes to getting overfitted with your code? Like, how do you think that's a big enough issue? Like, what is that issue about, first of all?
So overfitting would be uh, okay. I'll give you an example that we've seen.
Right.
Uh, we have seen tests that try to match the description or try to match the name of the function that we were trying to generate the test for. And if you go by it like if you go by just the name and forget what's written inside, you would
Hmm.
get something which might not reflect the reality, and again you need to verify it. Or the other
Right.
way would be
Uh,
to disregard the name itself, or maybe if you consider the function name itself and then even consider the code, if it is an incorrect implementation or an incomplete implementation as well, because code is never static, right? It gets reviewed, it gets updated. So depending on at what time you have generated that test, that would again need to be updated, because uh, because it was
Mm.
generated on a different reality. It would not have been a problem had you written it yourself, because you would know that okay, this breaks, or you would have let your you would have actually let your test break if it didn't match. But it's using GenAI, you could land in a situation where your tests again pass, because the tests were written very close to the implementation of the code itself. But again, they don't uh, reflect the reality, or
Got it.
your
Understood.
your other changes, your new changes, they might still end up passing the test and not reporting the problem. That's not how you
That
should
makes
actually do unit tests.
That makes sense. That makes sense. In fact, just for people who've just joined the webinar, we're going to have the last 5 minutes of this webinar open for Q&A. So we're going to wrap it up in the next 2 minutes. We already are close to about 22 minutes now. So we'll keep enough time so that, we can take in some last minute questions. In fact, we'll spend about 5 minutes on questions. So yeah, I think I get it, Karan. So, the premise that we started with was that GenAI has a lot of potential for testing and quality. The most early use cases that people are exploring with GenAI is unit testing, and Copilot is a prime example. It's become really popular. The good parts of it is it's a great boilerplating solution. It has some potential to discover edge cases that developers would be after, given that they may not know everything, or they may miss everything that they need to test. But the things that teams need to be careful about are that it might force you into a maker checker system, or generally speaking, it would not have the ability to do integration testing, which is critical. So what I'll do is basically I'll summarize our discussion with the hits and misses we feel that
Yeah,
we know about GenAI, specifically for the use case of testing your code or unit testing. So as I explained, great tool. GenAI is a great tool for boilerplating. If you are starting to write tests or you've already not written tests, you can probably trust Copilot kind of tools to generate a boilerplate code for you. It to some extent reduces the bias while writing tests, but it has own bias depending on how well the model is trained. And again, me and Karan believe that the bias that developer has is better, a good bias than the bias that a tool would bring in or a model will bring in. But definitely has a lot of misses, Karan. So it doesn't eliminate the effort of writing tests completely. I'm assuming, and you would agree with me,
right.
that's a good enough goal that teams aspire for, right? The effort that you have to put into write test.
I mean, less work for you, the less you work, the better you do.
That's right. That's right. And I think the most important part that should sum up this, the problem, or I would say the careful parts about GenAI is its inability to test uh, your application from the context of all the external systems, which is very critical. We can maybe organize another webinar on it and maybe explain people who are curious about using GenAI and other kinds of tools for testing as to why integration testing is that important. You can test your code, you can write test for the functions inside the classes, branches, whatever it is. But if the test that you have has no context of the external components, I don't think
Right.
that testing is complete. So that testing is definitely incomplete, right? Okay, all right. So I think that sums up or what we wanted to discuss in this webinar. We've got more than 150 registrations. So yeah, the excitement is palpable. There is a lot of curiosity about GenAI. And what we'll do now is devote the last 5 minutes we have of this webinar to questions. So we'll take up questions quickly. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of things we may not have touched, given we've only had 25 minutes to cover this webinar. So we'll take up questions uh, quickly and then answer one by one, depending on who has the best answer. In fact, I'll take the questions, Karan, and maybe you can answer them. So we'll start looking at the questions ourselves. So I think the first question, Karan, that I get here is that what do you think could be the promise of GenAI for end-to-end testing? Do you think that it it would
End-to-end
have the same
testing.
promise? Yeah, end-to-end testing. Do you think it will have the same promise as we think it has for unit and integration testing, or maybe it's not integration testing but unit testing?
Uh, well, I mean, it is generative in nature, so it will at the end of the day generate something for you. But generating end-to-end tests at scale, that would mean uh, a lot of flaky tests and some things that are again like whatever drawbacks that we have mentioned here. Imagine them at scale of an end-to-end test, which are anyway going to be uh, flaky because of the nature of end-to-end tests. You have to have an environment ready. You have to have
Hmm.
your application up. You need to have all the dependencies up at that point of time, and then to have something like GenAI write a test for you. Mm,
Hmm.
I mean, you can try. I really haven't really thought about it. Never thought that I would be uh, doing end-to-end testing at scale because, uh, yeah, I mean, it's not reliable. At least I would say that if you have tests which are which have less, say, they have low coverage, but they're at least accurate and deterministic, that would be better.
Hmm.
So yeah,
That makes sense. That makes sense. In fact, well, end-to-end testing is a different beast altogether. So, well, not only it is very expensive, but I think it has diminishing returns. So, it's a good question, I guess. When somebody is going to put his head around to ensure that that can be solved. But yeah, I think at the moment it has a uh, great potential for unit testing. And the next question that we have here is that how Karan, in your opinion, like since you were the CTO at an organization, been an engineering head at organizations before, how would you scope a Gen AI pilot? Like, what would you look for? So there are a lot of. So I think the question is coming from the perspective that there, I guess, a lot of tools out there that are promising the potential of Gen AI. So, what would you look for when you try to scope up Gen AI tool?
I think right now it's pretty early to uh, sort of commit to a particular tool because it's still under rapid development. Copilot is, if I can just give a recommendation, Copilot is the best one out there. Uh,
Mm,
but uh, what I would be looking for if I have to do it, I'll forget about the Gen AI part or the AI part of it.
mm,
Is it able to give me? Is it able to sort of give me a good boilerplate for lack of a better word
right,
again?
right,
Does
right,
does it understand the context, or does it understand the uh, frameworks that I'm using? So if you, in fact, if you're using something which was developed in the last few years, like last 2 or 3 years itself, you might not have good stubs for that or good mocks for that.
right.
I would look
That
for
makes sense.
tools. I would look for maybe specific tools, maybe a model that was trained for only one language rather than trained for everything. Uh, if that is that, but I think Copilot is fantastic for everything.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. In fact, next question is a little related to my first question, but I think a little more nuanced since we've been talking a lot about integration testing, or definitely a miss that at least Copilot kind of tools have in terms of promise. Have you come across any tool that like a AI agent of any sort, maybe built on Gen AI or some other form of AI that can do integration testing?
That can do integration testing. Well, we have our tool that does
Right.
integration testing,
That's
but it does not.
that's right.
It does not sort of work on the principle of Gen AI. But
Mm,
what we think is that you can actually have Gen AI discover certain API paths for you. Maybe if I are just restricted to API testing, you can use Gen
okay.
AI to generate some traffic for your application, which
Mm.
you might have missed, and then you have a separate tool which is uh, going to generate test cases automatically for that traffic. That's one of the use cases that I can think.
So you're saying that ability to generate some form of phantom traffic or maybe real traffic gives maybe a tool, an integration testing tool, same superpowers as a
I
Gen
mean,
AI tool, but like a
I'm looking at it as that way. So I'm trying to reduce it to problem that is already solved. If you have a good whatever is your integration tool, integration testing tool need not be HyperTest as well. If you have something which is already working, maybe you can use something that augments that is missing from it, and discovery of APIs or from your code. That is one of the use cases that you can use GenAI for
Yeah, that makes
integration
sense.
tests.
Yeah, in fact, it strikes me here that if you look at the conventional test pyramid, the at the base, at the bottom sits the unit test, integration test, and end-to-end test. So the first order of problem that GenAI could have solved or I wanted to solve was, the tests that are the most numerous in number, which are unit tests. And although it's harder because I think you explained that, I don't know, you have to build this capability for all frameworks, for all languages. But what is definitely a big score is that if you're able to generate unit test using GenAI, then you at least have that base of the pyramid covered, right? Which is probably the largest number of tests.
Right.
And then maybe you can go one step further, keep moving up the pyramid, and obviously once you reach the height, you'll basically have a flag that you can hoist there. But getting unit test is the easiest, and then integration and end-to-end test would definitely be the hardest, right?
Yeah, it stems from the fact that unit tests are closest to the code. And
Hmm.
if we talk about, say, end-to-end tests, that have very little to do with the type of code that you have written rather than the behavior that you want your application to follow. Uh,
Hmm.
it's not tied uh, specific to your application. Like just to give an example, if you have written end-to-end test for an application, for an e-commerce application on React or on, say, Vue or on something else, whether it's a desktop application, the interfaces might differ a bit, but the actual test is going to remain the same, or the thought process behind that is going to remain the same. So you can't sort of use that to build your end-to-end test.
Makes sense. Makes sense. In fact, a very interesting question that we should have definitely take is that a user is, well, attendee is asking us, given the nature of these GPT models, or given their tendency to hallucinate, how much can you trust the tests that they end up generating for you? Like, how do you know? I'm assuming you said
Well,
you answered that there's a review process in place, but does how much of an additional effort would that put in on the dev, given that these models have the tendency to hallucinate?
I don't think it's going to be a problem at the review if we were talking about code reviews, or
Now, I'm talking about review of the test, I guess. If these tests if the model has a tendency to hallucinate, I'm assuming
I
he
mean,
meant, can you trust it?
you can basically then consider that as part of the job itself. You have to do it. There's no sort of but that's how you do it. You can't, if you're thinking that, okay, I will just point GenAI tool on my code, it is going to generate tests for that, and that I can use in my CI pipelines. That's not going to work. If that was the
That makes
question.
sense. That makes sense. Yeah, I think somewhere around that. One more question here is that, you know uh, a lot of the test. I think this borders on the redundancy question that we had discussed with these tests. So one of the attendees asking if uh, there is a way, well, it, since it has a tendency to hallucinate, it has a tendency to generate a lot of tests. How do you make sure that you can still make use, or is it possible to still make use of these large number of tests that is related for you, not review them as much, but still not take that much time to run it and complete your regression? Is there some happy balance that you can strike between the number of tests that you have, and without spending too much time reviewing it, but still using them for your regular regression?
Well, I guess use integration tests and have contract tests for.
Right. Right.
uh,
Shameless
See,
plug
these are
by
like
Karan. Right.
shameless plug, yeah, but I mean, there's not a lot of scope to actually work here, right? You have a tool that can
Mm.
generate a lot of tests. Uh,
Trade-offs in life. Right.
yeah, if you want more coverage with least number of tests, uh, I mean, it might become possible at some point of time. Right now, the best way I would again suggest is that you just see what it offers you, and then be very deliberate about what to pick and what not to pick.
That makes
This,
sense.
this is
That
actually a
makes sense.
very this is actually a very bad goal to have, to be honest. To have unit tests generated for me, which I don't even look at. Uh,
Hmm.
well, why would you even do that then? Just have a GenAI tool at the run, like dynamically generate the test and test your application, and like it would be generating some code which it seems it's good, and then it will say that yeah, I did a good job, and your test would pass, which makes no sense.
Yeah, actually, I think maybe he asked, is there a way to, is there a trade-off that he can live with, given that he doesn't want to write test, he wants to still trust the GenAI generated test, and he knows that maybe there could be a lot of tests that he might end up working with. So how does he make sure that he's able to strike
I
a
at
happy
least
balance
I,
between? Mm,
I would say that is a bad goal to have. uh,
mm,
because these tests are not only supposed to catch bugs for you, they also serve as documentation of how your application is supposed to behave. You can even, in fact, one of the things that I think we missed covering was you can have test code which is very complex in nature as well. So if you have to, maybe if you're again, I don't agree that if you are going to regenerate tests from your code again and again and not even review them, uh, you might as well skip the entire process itself.
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Next question, interesting question. Kirti is asking, how can we leverage Gen AI on our legacy automation to add new test cases? And is it feasible to leverage Gen AI for maintaining scripts that you've already written? Do you think there is any potential of anybody has explored the potential of extending Gen AI to maintain already written test scripts in any framework? Or does it even make sense?
I would categorize that as refactoring your automation, I guess.
Right,
At the
absolutely.
end of the day, it is your code itself. So, the refactoring, I guess, would be fine. Uh, if that is what you meant there. But if you're saying that I want to keep my tests in sync with the application code, and these are two separate, say, repositories or two separate projects,
Hmm.
or two separate pieces of code, like uh, GenAI would be, don't use it directly. I mean, again, use it for boilerplating, that you would need to understand, let your test fail first, because they would, whatever automation you have already written, let it fail first, so that it informs you that okay, it's no longer in tandem with your code. Go through the process that yeah, this is a bad test, or this test no longer represents the reality of the application. Then use Gen AI to generate a boilerplate which you can now edit and repeat this cycle. Uh, don't try to fix it like this, that okay, I'll just use Gen AI to generate something which is going to be used as is. That's not a good thing to do, I think, because what if you get it wrong? Because you would not have guardrails in place, and you'll have tests which work in, I mean, which don't work but they pass. That's not a good situation to be in.
That makes sense.
Not sure
I
if I
think
answered that question.
no, I think that makes sense. In fact, the way I understood is that well, Gen AI has its promise, but since the best it can do is generate boilerplates, so even if you have written some form of scripts, it will not be able to do a good job maintaining it because at best, what it will do is that it'll look at your code and maybe generate some form of boilerplate that you have to edit yourself. So yeah, maybe I don't know, maybe 60% of your
These
work
these
will be
boilerplates
done.
can these boilerplates can get better over time. I'm not denying that, but I would say even if they're like 95% correct, you would still need to review it, because your tests serve a different purpose as well, right? It's not uh, the purpose is not to just pass the test; it is to make people understand how your application is supposed to behave.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. All right. So I think that was Karan a good webinar. I think we were able to summarize well. Though I think I'll take your last comments on what is the world not telling people on GenAI when it is to be used for testing? So if you have to give one reason, what would be your biggest reason, or what biggest, not the reason, but like what is that one big thing that tools are not telling people about GenAI, at least those people who are considering to use it for GenAI or for testing? What would be
I
your
mean,
one one
mo
big
mo
miss for them?
most of the time it uh, increases the time that you take to write tests uh, than save it because of prompting, reprompting, so on. Best
Right. In
way
fact,
is again get something out, get something from the AI in the first place, and then make changes yourself.
that makes sense. In fact, let's do a shameless plug and say that, if you do, if you're considering something like GenAI, the effort of writing tests would not be completely eliminated. It'll just give you a good start. But the maintenance would be something that you would have to bear all the time, or you would have to at least keep maintaining the test that GenAI helps you generate all the time. And it might increase the time that it would take for you to complete regression on your builds, because either the test would be too much and you wouldn't have enough time to review them, so you may have to run all of them, or it just takes that much time to review that at the end of the day you feel that it's probably pushing you a little too close to the line when it comes to releases. So I think a better approach, I'm assuming, is to somehow understand how your application is used from a real transaction, real flow perspective, and use that information to generate integration tests, which are essentially more complete, more comprehensive in nature. And since we're
or
talking about
or more accurate of the
right.
reality of your application.
Absolutely, absolutely. So GenAI doesn't know your application that much, only your code. There is the better way of testing your application is somehow getting a tool that can make sense of the behavior of your application, which is basically your real transactions. So a tool that does integration testing can test your code with all the external components. We believe is the best bet, and that's the reason we are building HyperTest. But we still feel GenAI has taken the world by a storm for the right reasons. It is a great tool. It is a great tool for people who want to make a good start in writing tests. As I said, boilerplating, let's sort of TM that. And it does help you, reduce some form of bias, but it is not complete testing. So thanks guys for joining in. We've got a great set of questions. Sorry we couldn't take all. Some of them were repetitive. So well, I compressed all the questions into single questions, about 2 or 3 of them. But we'll keep organizing a lot of these webinars like this. We would love to hear from our attendees as to what could be the topic for our next webinar. In fact, we are a tool that we are a team and a tool that focuses specifically on testing. So we breathe, eat, and drink testing every day. So we'd love to organize more webinars. We love your comments on what we can do next. And as I said, thanks for being patient. Thanks for uh, asking those questions. And I don't know if those questions answers did not make sense. Let us know. We'll love to get back to you personally. Thanks, Karan. It was good. You were very patient, and I think a lot of these answers made a lot of sense. And let's chime in again when we have our next webinar. Chalo, take care. Bye bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.